Muted.
Shannon Jenkins, partner Treadway, Lumsden and Doyle, and I'm not sure if the computer or the telephone allows you to discern this or not, but I am currently coming out of off of a cold, so I sound a little bit funny, so I apologize for that from the outset. But I do want to welcome you to our presentation today, Digital Forensics, a Valuable Tool for Employers. We are so pleased at TLD Law to be joined by two experts in this area, and I'll allow them the opportunity to introduce themselves in just a minute. But as I said, Shannon Jenkins, partner in employment law. I found throughout my practice that the topic of digital forensics is an important one, and it's getting more important as the amount of data that we have access to is exponentially increasing. I believe that today's webinar is being recorded. At the end of the webinar, both Diversified Risk Management and ourselves will have the capability of placing this on our website. So if you missed all of it, or if you missed part of it, or if you need some information that you were just unable to write down, you'll be able to locate that on our respective websites. So at this time, I just want to make a short disclaimer, and then I'll turn it over to my two co-presenters. Of course, I am a lawyer. However, we're not providing legal advice in this seminar. We hope that we provide you information that you can use to formulate game plans, to spot issues in your organization, and to prompt you to pick up the telephone call to an expert if you encounter any of these issues or have any questions or concerns. So I'll allow Patty to introduce herself and tell you a little bit about herself.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Patricia Kotze. I'm the president of Diversified Risk Management. We're a licensed private investigation firm. We only work with employers and attorneys dealing with employee misconduct or any crime against the business. And with me, I would call him my expert in this area. He handles all of our special investigations, and I'm going to turn it over to Rory Montez.
Hi, good morning. My name is Rory Montez, and I am a case manager for Diversified Risk Management. I've been with the company for 9 years managing cases, including computer forensics. So that will be our topic here today.
And as you just heard, Rory used the term computer forensics. However, in the last, I would say, 10 years, because of the different components that we have out there, it obviously is now renamed to digital forensics, because as you're going to hear throughout the presentation today, it covers more than just a computer, and hopefully you'll understand where we're going with that. But the first thing here is our outline. Some of these areas we're going to spend more time on others. I do feel it's important to go back to school for a little bit and learn some terminology so that we're all clear on what we're asking for if and when we do need to involve our employment attorney or ourselves as an investigation firm to get information put together for maybe a termination or something else that you may be faced with down the road. The chain of custody is very crucial. We'll go over that, and we can also send you a printable chain of custody if you send us an email afterwards. A very important area that Rory will go over is turn off, unplug, and store securely. That is a very important area. We will briefly go over what the actual forensic process is. Shannon will then cover some cases, and very important, understanding a preservation notice. So let's get right into this. Our section 1, learning the terminology. I'll let Rory go through this area. Here you go, Rory.
All right. So some of these terms may be familiar to you. Many of them will be new. It's important for employers to know the terminology that we're going to go over. Why? Well, we're going to quickly discuss two terms. One is a CPU. The CPU is the brain of your computer, the central processing unit. It's actually very small, about the size of a dime, and it's what makes your computer execute programs. A hard drive, also known as a hard drive disk, is a storage device. They're internal or external, which digitally stores encoded data on rotating platters. Now let's just say your business receives notice that you're being sued by an ex-employee. The ex-employee's attorney believes you have copies of important work emails which may contain evidence that will help his client. Therefore, he requests access to that email data. Based on our definitions above, we know that the email data is stored on the hard drive. If the attorney requests a copy of the ex-employee's workstation CPU instead of requesting the hard drive, the attorney will later learn his request was a waste of time because his CPU does not store any data. It's just used to execute programs. This mistake would hurt his reputation with the judge, or even worse, it could result in zero access to the evidence he needs simply because he used the wrong term. Another reason terminology matters so much is that there may be criminal or civil consequences for your failure to properly respond to a preservation notice. This is something we'll discuss more in Section 10. So some of the basics that you should know about are what is a computer. A computer is a machine which manipulates data according to a list of instructions. And as we all know, these are growing rapidly as what is a computer, from tablets to smartphones to smartwatches, even children's toys and digital cameras. There are a lot more devices nowadays which could be called a computer, so it's important to be familiar with the various terms. Most of us know the compact disc. This is an older piece of technology which seems like it's on its way out, but it's still used a lot in business for storing data, so you should know what a CD is. We're next going to cover some of the basics that come up a lot in digital forensics. External devices are anything that can be connected to a computer, from a monitor to a keyboard to your mouse, flash drives. The list is endless. Now, when we discuss things like flash drives, that's very important, and we're going to cover those in greater detail. PDAs, do you remember these? Well, they still exist. PDAs are personal digital assistants. They're electronic devices which have many of the functions of a computer, a cell phone, a music player, and a camera. These are actually very important to digital forensics when you realize that many professionals, like doctors and attorneys, have been using the same PDA for 20 years. Thus, these can house important data and potential evidence. So you should always know what a PDA is. A cell phone. Now, a cell phone, we all know what a cell phone is. It's a cellular telephone, but they are all different. We know that we are dealing with the age of smartphones now, phones that are capable of having internet, email, text messaging, not just a standard phone calling. So this is something that you should be familiar with in general. Know that cell phones have the capability of sending data, of storing photos, and as a result, they should be remembered because they do have the potential for having evidence on them. We're also going to cover what is a shared folder. Now, this is something we probably all deal with on a daily basis if we work in an office. A shared folder is basically a shared folder on a device or network which is accessible by multiple people. So that means that if there's a server where we have all of our clients' folders, we can all access them and all work from different locations, even from different locations across the country. So it's important to know what a shared folder is, because in certain cases we may have instances where an employee is copying or taking information without permission from a shared folder. So we're going to go over those as well later. Next up, we come to server. A server is basically a group of computers. So a server is a computer program or device that allows other programs to work, which are called clients. Most of us are most familiar with what's called a mail server, and this is what actually sends and receives emails for us. We don't really see this kind of room where you see massive server farms. It's usually in a warehouse somewhere in Texas or in another state, but this is probably what's powering your office's computers. It's a setup similar to this. A mail server is very important for discovery and for digital forensics in that there may be a lot of email evidence which is deleted from an individual user's personal computer but it's still stored on the master server. So if something is missing from someone's email, it still may be recoverable if you can get access to the server. Okay, now we're going to come to some specific digital forensics terminology. These are actually the terms that relate to what we're going to be teaching you most about today. What is digital forensics? Well, there's only three ways to store, or only three forms of space on a hard drive: unallocated space, allocated space, and metadata. Everything you see on a computer falls into one of those three groups. Now, unallocated is space that is available for use. That's free space. So if your computer says it has 20 gigabytes available, that means it has 20 gigabytes of unallocated space available. Now, this space is interesting because there may actually be data in this space. Usually this is data that was deleted previously and will be overwritten later on when needed. Our next term is allocated. Allocated is space on a digital device that is actually in use currently. It's not available to be rewritten over. This is important because it shows that it's actually in use and it may have evidentiary value. Our third group is metadata. Metadata is literally data about data. And the photo you see on the screen is an example of metadata. You can see this is what you would see, for example, shows up for a document. There's no actual valuable information. There's no text. You can't tell what the document said if it had photos in it, but you can tell who wrote it. You can tell where it was saved, the date and time it was saved, when it was changed or modified, and a lot of other valuable information. This is especially key if someone tries to modify data or tries to modify evidence and make it appear as though it was created on a certain date or time. Metadata can actually prove that that's not true and help you identify when it was actually created. So metadata can contain the name of the person who created the file, the type of file it is, how many times it's been modified, whether it's been printed, and if there are any revisions. Now for digital forensics, that's basically, like Patty had mentioned earlier, the new coverall term. We used to be mostly known as computer forensics, but because there's so many new devices besides computers that are now being utilized in this field, we're moving to digital forensics. If you do need digital forensics, one of the more common things you're probably going to need to do is contact your attorney for e-discovery. E-discovery means electronic discovery, and it refers to the discovery phase of civil litigation when both sides have access to each other's evidence. So in e-discovery, it's not the same as sending copies of documents like in the old days. A lot of this is massive gigabytes worth of data which both sides may or may not have access to. So e-discovery is the overall term that you're going to want to learn for this type of work. Now ESI just means electronically stored information, and is any type of information stored electronically. This can be word processing files like a Word document. This could be voicemail messages, emails, databases, websites, basically anything electronic that's stored. This is very important because ESI is subject to e-discovery in litigation and is one of the main things people ask for. So now that we have gotten some of the heavy lifting out of the way, we'll move on to our next topic, which can directly impact your business.
Okay, so in section 2, I mentioned earlier, is about back up your data. And backing up your data is very important, especially when you make the decision that you are going to enter into a digital forensic relationship. So very important. Take some notes here. Rory, I'll let you start up with the first thing that any employer or attorney should caution their client on when it comes to backing up their data.
That's right. Backing up your data refers to making a copy of all the digital files or databases to a secondary site for preservation. This is done in case of catastrophic equipment failure, in case of accidents, or in case of theft or other issues that may occur. There's a lot of ways to do a back up your data. And a lot of it has to do with the size of your business, the size of the files that you need to archive. So your options here can range from literally getting an external hard drive and plugging it in and manually copying files from one drive to another. But if you have a larger business, if you have a more complex setup in your office, you may want to use an actual backup service. Now, there's a lot of these. These are either monthly services or software that you can purchase one time, and they basically put your data backup on a schedule. You pick what you want backed up and how often you want it backed up, and the rest is done automatically. So essentially, it's a very simple process, but it's one that we've seen a lot of cases where people contact us and they need our assistance because they didn't do this. And if they didn't do something as simple as a backup, we may not be able to help them recover the data they need. There are specialists that can help you with data recovery, but they are very expensive. So again, we highly recommend all employers utilize some kind of backup system in your office so that you're keeping copies of your most important files. All right, so now we're going to cover some of the main issues that can occur that would lead you to want to back up your data. Some of the issues that we've had clients come to us with are acts of God, like natural disasters, including fire, flooding, earthquakes, tornadoes, and explosions. We've had people come to us with accidental deletion of data. This can come from a keystroke error, someone hitting delete by accident. We've also had clients contact us because of unintentional loss of data due to power failure or power surges. Another big, very common one is mechanical failure. Hard drives, as I mentioned earlier, are stored on magnetic platters, which you can see on the screen above. Those eventually do wear out and become damaged over time, just from touching. So it's very important to be aware that hard drives do fail over time just from being a mechanical device that's used. And the last way we deal with on a regular basis is intentional destruction of evidence. This is where a disgruntled employee or employee on their way out either deletes data or moves data to make it harder for you to get to.
Rory, this is Shannon just jumping in for a quick second. As an employment lawyer, where my clients contact me sometimes when they have, like you said, the disgruntled employee that's left for whatever reason, and that's an employee that's had either a laptop or a cell phone that belongs to the company. The company will ask for that piece of equipment back, and many times I've had the case where when the equipment has been returned, the employee has, quote, restored it to factory settings. Right. And ostensibly because they had personal pictures or whatever on there that they didn't want you to have access to, but what ends up happening is all of the forensic data and information, including text messages, is completely wiped out. It may be a type of a device like an Apple product, which is especially hard to recover some of this material that's been wiped out. So you need to look out for, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, you need to look out for the employee who restores things to factory settings when they return your equipment to you.
That's a very good point. So if you do see an employee is returning an item, check immediately to see whether that's been done or not, because if you do have a backup that was recent, you may be able to recover that information. But as Shannon just said, if they do that, you may not be able to. Okay. So now we're going to skip on to Section 3.
Okay, so in Section 3, obviously we have to understand the importance of having a policy when it comes to
computer usage.
Yes, computer usage. I know Shannon will probably have something to say in this area as well, but we can quickly go through some of the policies and areas that definitely need to be covered and make sure that all employees understand this and that they sign off on this depending on what your attorney actually tells you to do.
Okay. All right, so obviously we all come to work to do a job, but human nature dictates that some employees will take advantage of unsupervised time. This occurs in a variety of ways. and can lead to a host of problems such as loss of efficiency, idling, sexual harassment, and even unfair competition or theft of trade secrets. Thus, it is critical that your business maintain a computer usage policy or create one if you don't already have one in place. Each employee should be asked to sign and date an acknowledgement, and a copy of that should be kept in their personnel file. The policy should at a minimum cover that all computers and all data transmitted over company computers is company property owned by the company. It should also cover the fact that no data or any property of the company on a computer may be removed from the premises without permission. In addition, we want to make sure that it covers issues that have more to do with behavior in the office as well. So this can include looking at pornography in the office, texting while at work, watching videos while at work, or anything that would essentially be time theft and not focused on completing the tasks of the employee.
You know, one thing that they should remember too, and some of the things that Rory just said, is that these are illegal activities, and obviously you should be concerned about the fact that you want to make sure that employees are not taking customer lists or any type of trade secrets that are financially connected to the business. So in the policy, I think we pretty much covered that. I don't know, Shannon, whether you want to add anything there. Again, I would always advise that if you don't have the policy, that you make sure that you put your employment attorney in charge of making sure that you've covered all of the components.
Yeah. So the policy should cover the fact that employees should not have an expectation of privacy. This is obviously company-owned equipment and information. It should cover what is not permitted through the use of the company electronics. It's really important that that policy, as written, be run by legal. And here's why. Because Section 7 of the National Labor Relations Act permits employees to engage in collective action for their mutual aid, benefit, and protection. And an electronic media use policy, which is too restrictive, can potentially violate the NLRA and subject the employer to penalties. So it's definitely a balancing act in terms of what is being given to your employees from a policy standpoint.
Okay, so I'm going to let Shannon cover a few other areas in here, especially as they come to triggering needs to preserve evidence.
So as an employer, you want to make sure that you have a resource available when and if a situation arises where you're going to need some help with a digital forensics plan. Here's why. And if any employment situation potentially can trigger the need to preserve evidence. This should be a red flag that goes up in your mind anytime any of these events occur. So you receive a workplace complaint. It can be an innocuous workplace complaint. It could be something from somebody who you have a specific concern about. But whatever the workplace complaint is, you should be considering in the back of your mind whether or not this is going to require some sort of forensic evidence surrounding the issue. Any type of a separation event, whether it's a voluntary or an involuntary separation. We talked a little bit about what happens when people leave your company and they return digital or electronic devices to you, making sure that, that they've not been wiped clean for potential evidence. Keep in mind that even if somebody is no longer with your company, statutes of limitation range from 2 to 4 years. So an employee potentially could come back with a claim 4 years from now, and if you've not preserved the evidence in some format related to that person's employment, that could potentially put you at a disadvantage. And of course, anytime you receive a formal claim through an attorney, you're going to want to take note as to whether or not your digital forensics is going to be required. Obviously, any business dispute between partners, shareholders, and as far as just a basic best practice, anticipate before it happens the need to preserve evidence. And so you're going to have to come up with a policy, not just the one that you hand your employee on about what he or she can or can't do with your digital media, but have an internal policy, a management policy about that's going to cover certain things. When and how often and in what manner do you back up data? What does your archiving process look like? Does it auto-archive? Does your auto-archive occur at 30, 60, 90 day, 6 month, 1 year intervals? What happens when you delete your email and then delete it from your trash item? Can you recover it? What's your policy or protocol in that regard? And then, of course, make sure that you have a policy that you disseminate to employees that restoration to factory settings upon return to the company of company-owned equipment is not permitted, impermissible. Okay, so what happens when a situation is triggered? You have involved your attorney and you need to make sure that data is preserved. The first thing that you're going to want to do is get a hold of that equipment. And this could actually be for a current employee who's out on leave. We call that quarantining or isolating the equipment. Why is that important? Because as we know from Rory's presentation, anytime you access somebody's computer or their digital device, it's going to change the metadata. And so if you have a situation where you need to forensically preserve some evidence, and dates and times and the last access are important, you don't want to have somebody tampering with that evidence. So you immediately need to quarantine that electronic item and not let anybody else use it. Sometimes there are computers where multiple people log onto that computer. You want to make sure that that device is quarantined or isolated. You're going to want to come up with your forensic expert, the scope of work. Computer forensics, and I'm not sure if we have a slide on this or not, is not cheap. It's actually quite expensive, in the several thousands of dollars. So you're going to have to determine, you may say, I want an entire forensic image of this person's phone, I want an entire forensic image of their desktop computer and their laptop computer. You may get a quote for that of $7,500. And so you need to be very particular about what it is that you're going to want imaged, what on that image you want actually reviewed by the forensic, and what is it exactly that you're looking for. Determine who is going to need to receive copies of that forensically imaged device, who's going to keep the original, and how many copies are you going to need. Are you going to have to give it to opposing counsel, or are you just imaging it for yourself in case the original is destroyed? And then, of course, what happens to the copies once those copies are no longer needed? Remember, those copies contain your trade secrets and confidential information. And so what's going to be the destruction protocol once that is no longer needed? And so that's a perfect segue into our next topic, which is chain of custody. Chain of custody is an evidentiary concept that Rory's going to talk a little bit about.
Yes. Now, as Shannon just mentioned, we have a lot of issues with computer forensics and keeping the data protected, especially because evidence that you may have on there may contain your trade secrets. It may contain information that you don't want falling into the other side's hand or into a competitor's hand. So what we call chain of custody is essentially the paper trail for documenting the seizure, custody, control, and analysis of any physical or electronic evidence. So chain of custody is that process. Maintaining the strict chain of custody is critical because it establishes proof that the evidence collected is the same evidence that's being presented in the court of law. Without a chain of custody, there's no way of ensuring evidence hasn't been modified or destroyed. Now, we mentioned earlier some terminology. One of the ones that we went over and briefly was a list of computer forensics. MD5 hash is basically a fingerprint. It's a computer fingerprint which allows the person, the forensic examiner doing the work, to verify that the same information on the image is the same information that they're reviewing. So some important notes for you to remember when discussing a chain of custody are that you want to always keep the date, time, location, and the names and signatures of the people collecting evidence. So from the moment a device is under suspicion and the manager wants to collect it, like Shannon had mentioned, the quarantine process, you want to keep track of where that computer was put. Where was it stored, and the who, what, when, and where.
Okay. All right, so as Rory and Shannon both said, that's very, very important. And I mentioned earlier, if you need a chain of custody, you can get a hold of us and we can email one to you. So here's a fun slide here. So take a look at that picture, and Rory's going to talk about what to look for when it comes to where could somebody be hiding information, storing information, or taking information from.
All right. So you get to work, you sit down at your desk, you fire up your computer. You sip your coffee, and you check your iPhone for text from a client. You open your bag, and you take out a flash drive. You pop it into the side of your monitor, and you open up the report you were working on last night at home. Then you remember, oh, I also went out for coffee last night. I finished that last page of the report on my iPad. So you take out your iPad, you log in, and you sign into your email. You print out the report. Now all of this happens within a 5-minute span. How many items or locations that were mentioned could contain evidence? All of them. So that's a lot to go over, obviously, in a 5-minute span, but that's a good example of all the different things you need to be aware of as an employer. So we're going to give you some specific examples of what to look for. If you have an employee who's leaving or has just gone on leave and you may need to collect evidence from them, there's a lot of different types of evidence or storage mediums where evidence could be. So we have here on this screen external flash drive, or external hard drive rather, a flash drive. We also have an internal flash drive and a reader. Employees also can store data on tablets, cell phones, PDAs, and SD cards. Smartwatches like the new iWatch, printers, yes, even printers and copiers have memory cards.
Yeah, and I want to mention something about printers because that's something that we don't think about a lot. But let's say you're having a confidential interview with an employee. They write out a statement for you of what they've done wrong. You're going to have a counseling session. You're going to be contacting the attorney. And you go into the copy center and you make a copy. Well, guess what? Somebody can go in there and download everything that you made a copy of and take that evidence. And I got to tell you, I myself am guilty of doing that, and it wasn't until we actually got into digital forensics that I learned that this is a very vulnerable area.
I actually hadn't thought of that either, so Patty, I really appreciate that.
Yeah, it's one that most people don't think of, but
right.
Yeah, copiers and printers do have memory in them. Our next slides will cover laptops, which we all usually are familiar with, the traditional PC tower, but strangely enough, even new video game devices for the kids like PSPs and Game Boys have internal memory. And if you know how to, you can actually make these into storage devices. In addition, we have digital video recorders. Now, these are DVRs that allow the surveillance system in most offices to work. If there's evidence or video footage on a DVR, it's important to know that most DVRs will reset or wipe themselves after 30, 60, or 90 days. So if there is key evidence, get a copy of it now. Employers should also be aware of what a CD looks like, DVDs, the good old-fashioned floppy disks, which still are actually being used, believe it or not. iPods, even though they are older, they can be used as storage. Digital cameras and BlackBerries, in addition, also have the ability to be plugged in and used as storage. And there are also devices that most employers wouldn't think of, like hidden storage devices. Because most flash drives are so small nowadays, you can fit them inside of a pen or other small objects. Here are some more examples of hidden stored devices hiding in plain sight. These are actually CDs. And sadly, these are actually examples of CDs that were seized by law enforcement during child pornography investigations. Most of us wouldn't even be able to tell that these are CDs, and in some cases they are hung on a wall or stuck with the kids' toys in the kids' room. But we have had cases where this has come up, so always be on the lookout.
And, just on that point, there was a law that went into effect, I think it was last year, it might have been 2 years ago, that makes IT professionals, mandatory reporters, pornography information that they come across in the execution of their job duties. Not that that's directly on this topic, but kind of raises that point.
And that's true. When that happens, you have to get the FBI involved immediately, especially when it deals with child pornography. And, of course, your attorney. That should always be your first phone call.
Okay, great.
Okay,
all right.
So we also have a few more we'll go over really quickly. Network databases, external servers, and ISPs. The ISP is basically your internet service provider. So let's just say an employee is at work, but they log into their personal Gmail account to send themselves a client list. You may need to have access later to Gmail's records, or Google's records, rather.
All right, and then quickly here, because we've covered a lot of this in detail, let's go through again the turn off, unplug, and following the chain of custody.
Right. Shannon had mentioned this as quarantine and isolate. This is key. This is key. Every time a computer is powered on, it changes the data on the computer. So just because you think that employee quit yesterday, so we shouldn't have to worry about it as long as nobody else sits there and gets assigned that computer, you're actually wrong. So that computer needs to be turned off. So step one, the device is turned on, turn it off. You want to make sure it is powered off and unplugged so it doesn't power back on its own automatically. This is important because, as we mentioned, just being on, sometimes data will be overwritten. So an example of this is that an employee is using a computer and they delete a file. That file that gets deleted now goes into the unallocated space. It was previously allocated. Now, because it's an unallocated space, it's kind of a scattered file in pieces. And the next time someone wants to use that computer to save a new document or save a new photo, create a new folder, the computer knows that area is unallocated and will rewrite that new data where the old data was. And you've essentially wiped out any ability to go back and retrieve that old data. Okay, so you want to also understand that aside from turning the device off and unplugging it, you need to store it securely. This is the quarantine portion. You cannot leave the device out where other employees could get it, access it, turn it on, or even possibly steal it. You want to store it in a cool and dry place. If it's just a hard drive, we recommend storing it in an anti-static bag, which you see on the screen above. Step 4 is you need to follow the chain of custody process. This means documenting along the way where the device was first found, when it was unplugged and stored, and any transfers of custody.
All right, and now moving on to Section 8, we're actually going to go through what is called the forensic process. We'll discuss what actually happens when a device needs to be reviewed to determine if it has evidence. And Rory will tell you as well that a lot of times you'll hear, well, we need to make a copy. The one thing that we will tell you is you will always need to have at least 2 copies, one for the attorney and one that actually is going to be worked on.
Right. Okay, thank you, Patty. So there are 5 steps to digital forensics. Step 1 is preparation. This is preparation for the digital examiner, not the data, and includes that examiner having to look at and determine what kind of operating system does the device use. Is the computer in your office that we need to look at Windows 7? Is it an iPhone running iOS 10.2? Is it a PDA running on Palm OS that's 20 years old? All of these are very important because we need to use the correct hardware and software to get the information from the device. Now, in addition, the investigator has to determine how large the device's hard drive is so that he can create an image that's larger than the original to make sure all of the data fits onto the device.
And that's also going to determine how long it's going to take and initially how expensive it's going to be just to make those initial working copies.
Yes, that's very true, Patty. A good rule of thumb is that, for every gigabyte of data, it's going to take about 10 minutes to copy. So the larger the hard drive, the longer it's going to take the examiner to make the copy, which will then make your bill larger.
Right. And just so you know this, when shopping, let's say, for somebody to handle this process for you, ask them whether they're going to bill you for the entire time or whether they're just going to bill for the process running on its own, which essentially that's what they should be doing. So they wouldn't or shouldn't be billing you for 10 hours. They should just be billing you for the actual time that it takes.
Right. And what Patty means by that is that obviously it's going to take 10 hours to copy all the data over. But for the majority of that time, the examiner doesn't have to do anything. He only has to monitor it to make sure that it's hasn't stopped or broken. So if you get a bill for 10 hours, you should know that most of that time was spent with him doing something else or working on another project. So it's always good to ask that question. The next step is data collection. This is a step where the investigator physically plugs in special hardware and uses specialized write-blocking software to create a copy identical to the hard drive that he's already making the copy from. Now this is crucial because this is essentially the fingerprint. Like we talked about earlier, it's called an MD5 hash, and you can see on the screen the string of numbers. This is what allows a forensic examiner to state that the data he reviewed is the same data being reviewed in court. And it also allows a third party to scrutinize the same work and verify that an MD5 hash was created and the data was identical. Now this is very important because copies are not the same thing as images. A forensic image is a bit-for-bit image that can be verified by MD5 hash authentication. A copy is not the same. So if you have your IT guy make a copy of your ex-employee's hard drive, you should understand that that evidence could be thrown out of court as inadmissible. Why? Because when you drag and drop data, when you copy data, it changes the dates and times in the metadata. It will show the date and time of when you copied that data, not of when the data was originally created or modified.
Any comments here? I think it is important to say that, you know, your IT is great for support and archiving and security and just the day-to-day repairing of your devices there at your workplace, but digital forensics is a science, and we need to make sure that we treat potential evidence accordingly.
Right. So step 3 is examination and extraction. That's where we basically take a look at the image that we have created, and we extract the data from it. And then step 4 is where the actual work happens. This is where we do the analysis. We look at specific information, the metadata, the emails, Office documents like Word documents, PDFs, Excel spreadsheets. This is the type of data that generally employers are looking for. Now, Shannon had mentioned earlier, a very important thing for you to do when you're going to utilize digital forensics is know ahead of time, what are we looking for? Are we looking for a smoking gun that's in an email? Is there a photo that an employee took on a certain date or time? There are things like that that will help save you money ahead of time, because if you know going in, we're looking for emails between December and January 2015, 2016. That's a much more specific period than us searching through every email on your office's server. Now, the last step of what we do is called reporting. This is very important because obviously the attorneys that hire us need to know what exactly we did. What are our qualifications? What work was done? What hardware was used to acquire the data? What software did we use to acquire and extract and examine the data? Now, we also put together a written narrative. That basically describes where the item was found. The hard drive was found in a laptop was found at this desk. We document whether or not it looks like items were deleted or whether it looks like things were changed intentionally. And we also make a list of all the other activity that occurred on the device. Now, this is an interesting one because a lot of times when we're hired, we are hired for a very specific issue. And in doing our work, we'll sometimes find other information the employer didn't know about. So we may get hired to initially look for a smoking gun email, but while doing that, we may find that the employee was also, well, let's say at work, also texting from their computer another employee when they should have been working. So it's separate issues, but there is a possibility that we may learn other things.
Another reason why it's important to use forensic professional to do your computer imaging is because at the end of the reporting process, if the case is in litigation or if you anticipate it's going to be in litigation, or you're, for example, an employer who's had some trade secrets stolen and you need to go in for some ex parte relief for an injunction, then you're going to have your forensic do a declaration, which is a statement under oath, not just a report to you, but a statement under oath listing their credentials and qualifications, identifying the process, laying out the chain of custody, and providing some conclusions under oath that's going to have to be presented to the court. And if it's just your IT guy that you're relying on, the declaration may not be sufficient evidence to get the relief that you're looking for. So really important to use a professional to do this process.
Okay. All right. Now we have some types of cases. You want to go over any particular case that you have, or Rory? I mean, we've done so many different types of cases in this area, and this picture pretty much gives you a good idea.
Sure. I'll go over a couple of real-life cases that we've done where digital forensics were used to assist employers. In one instance, an engineer who owned a small business creating rim designs for tires called us. His business had recently had a break-in. The surveillance camera footage showed that his biggest competitor had smashed a window, climbed in, and had sat down at one of the desks in his office and plugged a small external hard drive into the computer. Now, he had called the police, but when the police arrived, the competitor was already gone. When the competitor was interviewed by the police, he claimed he was only looking for files that were not related to rim design and were actually his own files. So he was claiming that he was a victim of theft, essentially. Now, our forensic examiner was able to go in and prove that the competitor did, in fact, steal schematic files related to rim designs. We did this by tracking the file names and the file locations that were transferred from the computer to the external hard drive. As a result, the competitor was charged criminally and sued in civil court by our client. In another case, we were hired by a large asset management company. One of their most senior employees appeared to be moving money around suspiciously, so they wanted us to look into it. Our investigation included forensically imaging the suspect's and his secretary's computer hard drives. We then learned the sneaky secret. He was having his secretary do most of the dirty work herself. This was done so he could keep his own email files free from suspicion. We interviewed him, and based on our evidence, he admitted to embezzling over $3 million from his employer over a period of several years. He's now currently in prison and paying restitution to his former employer. This last one I'm going to go over is a little different, but it still is computer forensics, essentially. We were called to interview a salesman who had been threatening to quit and acting erratically in the office. When we arrived, he tried to play it cool for over an hour. Then he asked to use the restroom. He casually walked down the hall towards the restroom, but as he approached his workstation, he grabbed a laptop off of his desk and sprinted toward the exit. Our investigator tackled him and held him until law enforcement arrived. When the police showed up, we searched his vehicle and found several client lists and several forms of proprietary information on a laptop that was inside his vehicle. It turns out he'd been selling company secrets. Our forensic review of his laptop confirmed this, and he was terminated.
Unfortunately, those case examples are real-life examples. You have to, as a pragmatic business owner and manager, expect that something along those lines is going to happen at some point or another. If you don't voluntarily develop a digital forensic protocol and data preservation plan, you can be assured that at some point you're going to be involuntarily subjected to that. So the last section that we're going to go over is called Understanding Preservation Notices. We've gone over here the significance of ESI in litigation. Most litigation involving ESI is going to start with what's called a preservation notice and a litigation hold letter. These are two different documents that you, as a business owner, may be presented with. The first one is going to come from your lawyer, your own lawyer, and he or she is going to tell you there is some dispute with the other side. We need you to make sure that you preserve all important information. We now know what that information looks like. We now know as a result of this seminar today where we can find that information, and we now know what the components of a data preservation plan should involve. So you're going to want to, at that point, when you receive the preservation notice from your attorney, make sure that your metadata is preserved, your hard drives, your servers, your archive process, that you've rolled out to your IT personnel and any other key personnel who may have access to the information, that a preservation notice has come and that the data preservation protocol should be implemented. The first inkling that you may get may also be from an ex-employee or executive whose attorney sends you a litigation hold letter. You may have no idea that there's even a dispute, but the first piece of correspondence you get is a demand letter from this person's lawyer notifying you that all data and information is to be placed on a litigation hold. I've sent these myself. I've received them myself. And if you don't respond to the preservation notice or the litigation hold letter with an appropriate data information protocol, then there are some penalties that are associated with that. And that's the last thing that we're going to be talking about. There are negative outcomes which can result from the failure to preserve the ESI or comply with litigation hold letters. These include, of course, monetary sanction and discovery for failing to turn over information. An evidentiary sanction. The judge may prevent you from putting on a defense or a claim or a cause of action because you failed to turn over evidence or information in support of that. You may receive an adverse jury instruction from the judge. If you fail to turn over information or evidence in discovery, information that you had, the jury which has been impaneled can be instructed to infer from that the information would have been negative to you and that's why you didn't produce it. That could be very devastating to your case. And of course, just not having the information is going to prevent you from possibly proving key aspects of your case. So much of our employment law is based on what employees do in our virtual workplaces. So whether it's inappropriate text messages or voice messages or photographs or emails, that's all in a cyber and electronic environment. If you don't have access to that information, you may be prevented from proving key aspects of your case. And of course, the last one would be if you fail to comply with the judge's order to turn over evidence, as we talked about, or as Patty talked about at the very beginning of this seminar, there is possibly a contempt penalty that is associated with that, which is a quasi-criminal penalty for failing to comply with the judge's orders. So hopefully we didn't scare you, but gave you a lot of tools and information that you need to make sure that you're in compliance with all of the components of a digital forensics plan. So let me close by allowing Patty and Rory to talk a little bit about what DRM can do for you. This is the first in what we hope is several presentations throughout the year. So we'll make sure that we notify you when and if those occur. But you guys, why don't you close it out for us?
Okay. Well, up there on the screen, I've put several areas that we do active investigations for employers. But if you look at number 3, digital forensics and e-discovery, that we use in everything just about you see up there. We can use it in due diligence, definitely in workplace investigations. We've used it in sexual harassment investigations, fraud, embezzlement. And then on the proactive side, we do the pre-employment background checks, drug testing, and physicals. So, Rory, you want to wrap up? Of course, what's not up there, surveillance for worker comp fraud. Anything else you can add to that?
No, I think you covered it.
Okay.
If there's anything having to do with employers, we're here for you. So we wanted to thank you for joining us for our presentation today. For more information on digital forensics, please feel free to contact us or Shannon at Treadway, Lumsden & Doyle.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for joining us.